This is Modern Gaming Culture. This series will attempt to highlight the phenomenon of PC, console, and mobile gaming and bring to light all of its phenomenal aspects. Let's take a dive together into the world of modern gaming and take apart its structure. Now, here's your host, Rotimi Osagi. All right, this is Modern Gaming Culture, episode 13. Modern Gaming Culture. Last episode, sort of doing like an introduction for a League of Legends like workflow, really getting people familiar with what that would look like, right? I think I want to sort of continue along those lines. So, I was talking about how League of Legends is a game of chance, right? So, the key to being a good League of Legends player, I think first thing is following your heart, right? Not following the crowd, right? I think that is actually the best way that you'll become a better League of Legends player, right? And so that's what I advocate for first is really developing courage and confidence, particularly too. I think it's actually confidence more than courage. Because the thing about playing League of Legends, right, especially at a very high level, is that um, you know, again, with games of chance, right, you can't really, again, once you make a decision, you can't go back on it, right? That's how especially a lot of these games of chance are designed, right? They're really trying to take away that element of surprise, basically, right? By adding stuff like um, stakes and stuff like that, right? And so as opposed to games where you're generally putting up stakes, right? This is generally a risk and reward dynamic, right? Kind of like a push and pull, and so it's a lot more different to really calculate your value gain, right? Than putting up $50 and then getting back 500, right? And so this is something where you need to really you know um cashing your chips with a lot of, pizzazz, I would say. You know, um, the thing about um, the thing about League of Legends is that you know, uh, well, if you really understand how League of Legends even entered the marketplace, sort of to give a little bit of history lesson on League of Legends, League of Legends pretty much entered the marketplace with a blank check, right? These are guys that grew up playing games like Dota and Quake and stuff like that. And so they pretty much just took what they had, and then they just put it on to League of Legends, right? League of Legends is not really a game that was really put together and put out there with the player in mind. It's a game I feel like, and this is not generally like the sentiment with most people, is that, League of Legends is, there's a lot of memes when it comes to League of Legends, that League of Legends, likes to steal stuff, etc. You know, you find a lot of similarities between games like League of Legends and games like Dota, right? A lot of characters, etc. Right? League of Legends is not a very original game, right? It's not very hard to come up with original characters, and largely a lot of characters in League of Legends are the only thing that really makes them original is their lore and their names. and even sometimes their names aren't even that original. But you know, it's something where you have to understand that this is not a game where um, you know somehow you can just hop on and just kind of run roughshod, right? It's a cooperative game, right? And so it's something where a lot of that degeneracy, right? For basically wanting to be malicious, right? Will bleed into a society a lot, right? Because people are basically just not taking the game seriously. I talk about how um, the purpose of gaming is to cultivate aspects of yourself and your relationship with others, right? And so when you get people who think they can really, especially with a lot of this, um, sort of like technological imbalance that you can find in society, especially between social economic groups and also between culture groups, right? It becomes a big issue, right? When, you can't really, you know, uh, you know, differentiate, right? Um, when you're getting a lot of false positives, right? Um, you know, the thing about League of Legends that makes it the most interesting, right, is that the game, the game's cast, is incredibly diverse, right? You know, you're not going to get, a lot of similarity between um classes, right? Like you'll find a much different play style um, for different lanes, right? Um, and different, characters, etc. And you'll find, that basically um, players will just sort of, figure out on their own generally how characters are supposed to be played, and generally will play characters that way, right? The thing about a game is that it's not about basically it's not about what you take away from it, right? It's really what you put into it ultimately that's actually more important, because the thing about games is that, again, right, um if you don't really play a game properly, right, um you'll find yourself feeling very isolated, and you'll find yourself feeling very ostracized, right? League of Legends really fomented this significantly in society for sure, right? Because you know, um, you have all these people who really try to adopt this very, um, degenerate play style, right? And again, with all these false positives coming to them, they begin to believe in their own bullshit, as we say, right? And so it's something where that's really the important part of um, really, what I was talking about, following your heart, right? Um, because with, League of Legends huge cast and stuff like that, a very diverse cast, um, you'll find a lot of problems, right? Like the thing about League, right, is that compared to, games that are either like 1v1, right? Like Pokemon, um, more often because there is a lot more variables, because now you're playing with a team, the better team will actually win more often, right? And so it's something where um, you can't necessarily um, kind of follow the crowd in that respect, because if you kind of just taking advantage of a lot of stuff, right? And we're talking about like level playing fields here, right? We're not talking about because League of Legends has been through a lot of iterations, and so there's been a lot of times where you could just do some really kind of unfair stuff, and you could definitely um, eke out a lot of wins, right? But we're just talking about level playing field, right? 5 human beings versus 5 human beings, right? Um, it's something where you have to really understand that um, winning or losing is definitely comes down to chance, and it comes down to cooperation more than it comes to inventing styles, etc. Right? Something I'm realizing when coming back to playing League is that people are trying to invent styles, right? It's so funny because um, you know, in League's earlier days, right, they actually did a lot of funny Easter egg stuff to um sort of take away a lot of this, um take away a lot of this sort of um degeneracy, right? Particularly with the class of characters known as ninjas, right? Those champions, Lee Sin, Kali, Shen, um, Kennen, right? Those champions, um, basically, what they did was that, they reduced your base health, your teams. No, the ninjas particularly, their base health got reduced by 1 for each ninja that was on your team, right? Just a little Easter egg to sort of disincentivize players from playing ninjas, right? And now you have this kind of phenomena of this invented style of play that I kind of coined as the ninjas, you'll just log into a game, and then your top laner and mid laner, if you're not playing top and mid, will hover ninjas, literally. They'll hover Shen, Akali, etc. Or some type of, kind of edgy, fast paced, opportunistic character along those lines, right? Um, and, you know, pretty much if you don't play that game, you're going to lose, period, right? Literally, you have to be able to play that, style, right? It's an invented style, right? It's not necessarily a team composition that you can really put together, right? And this kind of just boils down to, this dynamic of, having shit parents, basically, right? These people, generally the people who came into League of Legends, and again, right, League of Legends just entered the marketplace, right? Pretty much just to make money, right? Their goal was to basically try to, show, if you really want to put it that way, show, Nintendo how it's done, basically, right? Um, and so basically, there was no, um, you know, vetting when it came to really introducing people into the League of Legends company, Riot Games, right? Um, and generally, you know, they didn't really attempt to really, you know, put on a show, right? When it comes to really putting out a game, right? And so again, right, all these players that came into play didn't really get put in their place, and it bled down into the players that are playing League of Legends today, right? Because largely most of the people who are playing League these days, weren't playing League 10 years ago. They probably weren't even born 10 years ago, most of them, right? Um, and so yeah, it's a completely different player base, right? Um, and then all the same garbage just bled back down, right? Um, you know, League of Legends is not necessarily the culprit for a lot of this degeneracy. It's just that again, when you just enter the marketplace to really just do this kind of breakaway civilization type jazz, right? um, you know, you're not necessarily going to get, the Colosseum, the Roman Colosseum, right, as the end product. Let's just say, right? So I'm going to be playing a lot more League. Um, yeah, I I just want to learn a lot more stuff, and so yeah, uh, I don't know how many more episodes I'm going to be putting out. I definitely want to get a lot of stuff off my chest when it comes to League of Legends, right? I have a bone to pick with League of Legends, to be honest. And so I think I'll do a couple more of these maybe. I didn't even expect to do another one. Um, but I think it's very important because basically, you have this sort of, malaise that is really on the League of Legends server that makes it very difficult to really put a lot of pieces together unless you're really equipped to do so. So I think it's gonna be very helpful um for the show and just in general if I just put together a lot of stuff when it comes to League of Legends, right? Really give people perspective so they can understand that League of Legends is not just you know just it is what it is. Yeah, there's definitely a lot more to League of Legends than meets the eye, right? So um that's all I really had planned to talk about. Yeah, I can talk a little bit about kind of, you know, um, my background playing League of Legends. Right. So, I pretty much been playing League of Legends since it's been out. Right. Again, League of Legends has been through a lot of iterations. When League of Legends first, entered the marketplace, right, it was put into stores as a CD, right? It wasn't free to play. You had to buy it as a CD and then install it. I mean, like, I know most people who don't even play League of Legends these days don't even know what a CD is, right? Um, but it was it was a disc, right? And so basically what you would do is you'd have on your PC, right? You'd have, and I don't even think PCs really have, I don't think they even have uh CD ROM, uh those CD-ROMs anymore, right? And so yeah, you would pop it open, put it in, and then you'd install on your computer, right? Um, and back then if you did that, you'd get access to these kind of skins like Black Alistar, King Rammus, etc. Um, and basically, you know, that was the original League of Legends, right? And then they, put it onto software, right? And it was free to play, right? Um, and so, uh, and I don't have a CD of League of Legends. I don't think anybody does, and it doesn't really matter because honestly, I don't even think you can even install. I don't even think it even supports anymore. And plus, you have to have a CD-ROM to even do that, anyways, right? Which you definitely don't, right? And so it's something where, yeah, I've been playing it, pretty much since League of Legends has been out, right? And you know, I tried all roles pretty much. First character I played was a Nivea. Um, and then I liked playing Kale a lot. Kale was a lot more different then. The game was a lot more simpler then too. Um, Kale was a lot cooler then too because she was ranged practically from the start of the game because her E, um, which is still an auto attack modifier, it gave her the attack range for a short amount of time, right? And basically, how you would play Kale is you would build um, two cooldown items, right, to get her up to 30% cooldown or 40%, which was the max. Particularly, I would build Gnasher's Tooth and Zephyr. Zephyr is not even in the game anymore. It's still in Teamfight Tactics as a item, but that's generally not Zephyr. Well, that's not what Zephyr was. Zephyr was, I think it gave you tenacity, if I'm not mistaken, and then it gave you attack speed and cooldown. I think that's, and it had something else on it too. I think it was tenacity. And basically, what it would do is that it would give you 100% uptime on your E, and so um, I thought that was a pretty cool mechanic, right? That kind of scaling into that, right? So you'd have 100% uptime, and then I think there was like an AOE when you auto attack, right? And generally, when you now with Kale, you have to get up to like 5 stacks before you get the AOE. I think you only get at level 11. Um, yeah, and like the first character I like mained was Olaf. Played a lot of Olaf, really enjoyed him. I got like my first like 10 game winning streak with Olaf. And then Echo came out. I liked Echo. I got 10 game winning streak with Echo. Um, and then kind of, you know, a lot of characters started got it integrated into a lot more roles, right? Champions like Gragas got turned from mid laner, particularly into a champion that can be playing a lot more roles, right? So now Gragas was a jungler, and you had this meta where the best two junglers were Rek'Sai and Gragas. That was a pretty fun meta. That meta, I got pretty good at Rek'Sai. Um, Back then, Rek'Sai, her ultimate, she could ultimate. Her ultimate would let her um, teleport to a tunnel, right? Any tunnel, right? On any side of the tunnel. Um, and it was basically like teleport today, right? Where you'd like fly across the screen, right? Um, and yeah, and then it was pretty much the same Rek'Sai, right? I forgot what her Q did. Her Q did something. I think it revealed you. I think it still reveals you. Um, and then her ultimate gave her attack speed as well, right? Passive attack speed. Um, and yeah, and the game was a lot more simpler then. And so Rek'Sai, was a lot more simpler too. She was really strong early game, and because her ultimate didn't really do anything except for give her attack speed, and it gave her a lot. I think it was like 40% or something like that. Um, she was pretty strong, right? Still is. I think she's probably like the best jungler in the game. But that's neither here or there. Um, and yeah, that was pretty fun. I didn't like playing Gragas, so I didn't play that much. I still don't like playing Gragas. I think he's kind of like he's very durable, but he's very unreliable. So I don't like playing him. Um, and yeah. I mean, and League of Legends went through a lot of iterations, but generally the game pretty much stayed the same, right? There was never really like a power differential where through the eras, different characters were better than other characters. Generally, it was just up to your skill, right, and your confidence in yourself. And so, you know, your skills don't really wear off. You just have to keep them fresh. And so that's kind of what I do. My older brother does, and so then we just keep up to date with the pro leagues, right? And that's kind of how you just keep fresh playing League of Legends, right? I think the most important thing when it comes to playing League of Legends, especially when especially if you take a break, right, is you know, um, don't follow the crowd, right? Again, with this internet culture that we have, right, um, you know, it's very easy to just put yourself out there on the internet. Right? I talk about how this show doesn't just represent me just coming on and just turn on my microphone and just saying what I have to say. Right? I did a lot of preparation just for this show alone, and so you know it's very heartbreaking when you go on the internet and you just see people just spouting nonsense, right? Just because they have a microphone, right, and they can press publish, right, on a social media platform or whatever, some sort of content hosting website, right? So most important thing with playing, taking a break particularly, and with just following League of Legends is also just staying fresh, right? Because if you just kind of let your skills and your wits kind of just wane, you'll find yourself either drifting farther away from playing League of Legends, right? Or sort of becoming very kind of milk toast when it comes to your stance on League of Legends, right? And so it's something where you have to be very vigilant, right? League of Legends changes a lot, right? Because they have to try to introduce a new audience, and so it's something where you can't just, um, kind of just let your skills go the way of the dodo bird, right? Um, So, that's something you have to just really be cognizant of when you're, you know, playing League of Legends, interacting with people who play League of Legends, right? Etc. Right? Because League of Legends is it's like a breakaway civilization sometimes because you'll play and, you know, you have to just really keep your wits about you because 9 times out of 10, um, things that happen are not your fault, right? And so um, you can't let these people get to you. Right? I would recommend first and foremost what I would do is first I would mute the chat. Right? Just don't play with chat. You can play with emotes. You can play with pings. Just mute the chat. Right? And then mute your chat particularly. You can keep your the enemy team's chat unmuted, but mute your chat. Your teammates generally are just trying to mislead you because they think they know better and they're playing a different role. So I don't know how they got that idea, right? They should just focus on playing their role best, and that's what they should need to focus on. That's why I say mute your chat because generally the only person that you really want to hear from is your jungler, right? And maybe your support. So you can mute your mid laner, your top laner, your AD carry, and then keep your jungler and support unmuted, and then keep the enemy chat unmuted. That's a good way to start sort of getting an idea of what I'm kind of talking about with a lot of, phenomena in League of Legends, right? Um, that's step number one, right? Then once you realize, pretty much you don't even need feedback from your jungler or your support, you could just mute your jungler and support, right? Um, and then you'll start to notice certain types of champions and certain types of lanes will start to give you a lot of misleading information, particularly with pings, emotes, etc., right? Then you can start muting those people, right? There's certain champions, Lux, instant mute. Don't even think about it. Just go straight to where they are, press mute all comms. Um, you know, Morgana, Master Yi, right? Instant mutes, right? Um, Irelia's, right? Especially when it's like a blind Irelia, right? Mordekaiser, Darius, Garen, right? Kane, Caitlyn, Vayne, Zed, Lee Sin, right? Instant mute. Don't even think about it, right? People are playing on autopilot, right? And if they happen to type to you, you know that that's not a good idea. So instant mute, right? And then you'll start to realize that you don't really need to communicate with your teammates, verbally or through comms, etc. And then you can just go in right when the game starts, and you can just go to your champion icon and just press mute all comms. And if you want to play with emotes, sure, right? Because emotes generally have gotten pretty good, where they have the system pretty worked out pretty well, and so emotes are one thing, right? But yeah, then you can just start muting all comms, right? You need to be able to gather this information. It's not something you can just start doing immediately, right? And some people just never do it, right? Again, right? In League of Legends earlier days, right? The people who were playing League of Legends, these were people who were growing up with, you know, CD players, MP3 players, Walkmans, right? Um, DVD players, VHS players, right? VCRs, right? Basic cable, right? Dial-up internet, right? Um, Flash games, right? I don't even think you can play Flash games now unless you have to download a player, right? A lot of these Flash game websites have gone now, um, right? Shooting basketballs, right? Playing soccer with your backpacks, right? I don't just think that people still do, right? Generally, again, what the technology that kids have these days compared to the stuff that people were playing in League of Legends the earlier days, it's sticks and stones compared, right? And so, you know, it's something where we were very familiar with this type of bully, right? Where you just know, yeah, you got it, man. You know what's best? All right, bro. And so, um, you know, it's sort of that was kind of the mindset, right? So we're kind of very familiar with that, and so it wasn't something we really thought about, right? Nowadays, kids think anybody's their friend because they grew up on the internet, and so it's not they don't even really think about if people are really dangerous to them on the internet, right? This is kind of the importance of sort of technological literacy, right? People think that because they grew up with technology, they think that they know everything there is to know about it, right? um, and that largely you find that's um, very far away from the truth, right? um, Technological literacy is far more complex than being able to turn your computer on and pressing on the League of Legends application and then go and play Teemo support or something like that, and then call yourself technologically literate. It's a far more encompassing um, framework, right? And so that's kind of why you need to really just keep your wits about you when you're doing stuff like playing League of Legends and stuff like that, right? Um, in the earlier days of the internet, right? We were bombarded with a lot of this, information about, um, child predators, right? Internet bullies, cyberbullying, right? Um, you know, it was something that didn't really escape us. And then the people who, didn't receive the message, it was very obvious they didn't receive the message, right? And it was very obvious they weren't going to receive the message because we're already familiar with these people. We knew that these people are generally just not, you know, the best people in society. And so, it wasn't any mystery to us that, these people are not following the rules. Why is that? Right. Um, Nowadays, with this melting pot culture that you have in the West, right, everybody thinks that everybody's their friend, right? And they sort of just go along to get along, right? There's not a lot of separation when it comes to communication, like there was, in the early days of the internet, where, messaging somebody on social media, right, or through, the email clients, right, you know, was sort of like an ancillary way of communicating with people. And generally, you just go knock on somebody's door, right? Or you'd make plans ahead of time and just go meet them somewhere, right? Nowadays, people think that, you can actually carry on a conversation on, you know, on social media, right? And that's actually a, sort of like this sort of plugging into metaverse meme, right? Where, they think that's actually a effective form of communication, right? And so yeah, I consider the time we live to be in the internet dark age, and so internet literacy, I mean technological literacy is an all-time low, right? That's kind of just how dark ages are. Right? Generally, you find people, you know, that can't read or write. Now you have people that don't know, that talking to somebody through social media isn't the primary way of talking to somebody, right? Which I find is far more dangerous than, not being able to read or write, because then, that's just completely, you know, removed skill set. It's not like you still have access to a paper and pencil, right? And the power of the paper and pencil, right? With technology literacy, you can still post on the internet, you can still interact with the internet and still not know how to use it, right? And still have influence, right? Whereas, with, um, traditional illiteracy, it's just you don't know how to do it and that's it, right? And you just don't even know what that looks like, right? So, we're living in a society where, you know, it's very, very critical to really, really um, make the sacrifice to um, educate your fellow being, right? So, um, I think I'm just gonna leave it there for the former part of this episode. You know, that was kind of like a history lesson more than anything. So again, right, I'm still getting familiar with my audience, and so um, kind of just want to put that together to sort of provide a lot of context with my relationship with League of Legends, right? Um, and maybe I'll do a couple more of these. Um, but yeah, I think I'm gonna play a couple games and then I'm probably just gonna go head out to the store. So um, I'm just gonna leave it there. This has been Modern Gamer Culture. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you.